light. Yeah. So we're getting into a book of the Bible where a lot of people know the basic structure, the basic story. There are a lot of false notions about what this book is. And so just real quick, let me just clear up three things that Job is not. It's not in our Bibles to explain for us why bad things happen to good people. You're disappointed, aren't you? Is that why you came? Or is that what someone told you this book existed to do? Because Job is a good person, as good people go. And he experiences suffering unimaginable. And so you would think, yes, God in his wisdom and his compassion, maybe, for us, he put this story in his Bible and our Bible so that we could know why. Nope, that's not what the book of Job exists to do. The book of Job is not a hero's journey, meaning it's not an inspiring tale of a person who has to go through this terrible ordeal so that he can come out the other side a better man and bless his community and do all that. It's not the universal story of conquering the dragon, so to speak. And so Job, though he has a lot of qualities that are admirable, the point of the book is not to look at him and go, be like Job. Not only is this not a hero's journey to inspire us, while Job is experiencing a kind of testing, he's not actually the person being tested. I'll come back to that, but there's someone else that's actually being tested in the story. And I also just want to lay this one to rest. This is not a morality tale. The idea here is that when we look at the problem of evil or of suffering, we can't tie it up with a cute little bow, with some moral at the end of it. Well, here's the simple answer. If you just know this, or if you just do this, you'll be healthy, wealthy, and wise. It doesn't work that way. The book of Job is something else. I'm going to answer it not all at once, but over the course of the evening. One of the important things to do is spend a little time just thinking about how the book is put together and just so we can appreciate what kind of book this is. Have any of you ever heard that Job is the oldest book in the Bible? This is a very common claim. It's almost certainly not true. The reason people claim that is because the setting appears to be kind of patriarchal, like from the period of Abraham. It's before the law was given to Moses. And so some people just see that fact and make the assumption that if Moses wrote Genesis through Deuteronomy, but this story takes place during the time of Abraham, then it must be older. But there's really no evidence to support that. It almost certainly came up during the time of the kings or later. Some people even have it quite late, like during the time of the exile or something like that, which would make sense. Why would this book be written? Well, if your people have been taken into exile, they might be wrestling with these kinds of questions, right? So here's the truth. We don't know when it was written. We also don't know who wrote it. It is firmly fixed in the wisdom literature tradition. So Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, they're a package. They should be read together. They comment on one another. They build on one another. It belongs in that part of our Bible. It doesn't advance the biblical narrative, the core biblical narrative. So Job is not like part of the storyline of the Bible. His story is told in the Bible. But there's nothing that happens in his life that is carrying on the arc of redemption or anything like that. So it's really, properly speaking, not a part of the biblical narrative. It's wisdom literature. And there's actually a lot of debate as to whether or not this is a story about something that happened in history or a parable. No, don't freak out when you hear that. Jesus taught in parables. Right? When Jesus starts telling a story, a man had two sons. And I tell you, this is a parable. Well, it didn't really happen. This isn't like, oh, you're taking away the authority of Scripture. It's nothing like that. It's a legitimate genre and a legitimate teaching style. And there are plenty of people, fully conservative, following Jesus, loving him, good scholars who go, I think Job might actually be a parable, an ancient, long story. That's on the table, and it should be. It's also quite plausible that it's a real storm. Now, but here's a question. Do you speak in poetry? Like on the fly, can you just wax eloquent and speak in perfect meter and metaphor and all those things? I didn't think so. Right? So if that's the case, what we might have is a real character who went through a real ordeal, and many hundreds, if not thousands of years later, this story was finally set to ink and parchment, as it were, in a poetic way. And so the moment of inspiration is when God inspires the pen of the author in telling us this story. And so the story would be true, what it wants to communicate would be true, but the words are not like the exact verbatim words of these characters. We wouldn't want to, be too literal, I guess is what I'm saying. Some people have described the narrative as it's faction, right? It's not fiction, right? It's not journalism, like this is exactly what happened. It's faction, like it's based on a true story, and it wants to communicate truth. It's like, how many of you learned about the story of Julius Caesar by reading Shakespeare and his play Julius Caesar, right? It's kind of in this genre of faction. And so when we're in that genre, inspired by or based on a true story, you're going to see characters that are real. You're going to encounter certain narrative features and lines and things like that are real. But when you approach this genre, like in modern day life, you kind of go, well, what's the motive here, right? Like, what is the person who's writing the story, the person who's communicating the story, why are they telling it? What are they trying to say? So it's like the movie Gladiator, for example. If you're watching that movie, if you've seen it before, if you're watching it as a historian, you're going to hate it, right? Because its liberties are off the charts. It's absurd how ahistorical it is. But if you're looking at it as like a timepiece inspired by a moment in history with some meditations on stoicism and masculinity and those kinds of things and a beautiful score, you might love the movie, right? So there's something about this that we've got to ask those kinds of questions. What's the point? Okay? Because it's not advancing the biblical narrative. So the author is making sure we know this story for another reason in particular. And here are some other little clues. Uz, right? This takes place in the land of Uz, which we don't know where it is. There's a couple of tiny, tiny clues spread out in other parts of the Bible that maybe it's there, maybe it's here, but what does that mean? Maybe. We don't know, right? So we don't know where Uz is. And this is interesting. The word literally translated means counsel. And if you know this book, Job gets a lot of that in this book, doesn't he? Right? So it almost might be the author's way of saying in the land of counsel, right? It also might essentially be like this. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Or once upon a time. Okay? Job is not a Hebrew name. His three friends do not have Hebrew names. These are non-Israelites. So we have non-Israelites living in a land where we don't know is, taking place at a time period where we don't know. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Okay? One more thing. It is notoriously the hardest book of the Old Testament to translate. The writer has an expansive vocabulary. It means he uses words that you can't find anywhere else in the Bible, and that's actually how you get good at translation, is having other things to compare it to. And so the writer here uses so many words that don't show up anywhere else. There's a lot of interpretive decisions being made that are just hard for us to wrestle with. We just sometimes don't know what certain verses are saying. But it's also the poetic style. We all know this, that poetry has rhyme and meter and idioms and figures of speech and metaphors and all these kinds of things. Well, sometimes, especially if we're separated by a few thousand years, fair to say they might have different idioms, different expressions and things like that. So there's going to be a gap, a cultural gap that's very hard to close. And so if you're translating the poem, it's like if you go for word accuracy, it might not make sense because of the poetry. So there's some trickiness there. And there's something really important. This is a kind of key, I think, to help us get to the heart of what this book is about. and it's about understanding the structure of the book. The writers of our Bibles, in many cases, they are very sophisticated in the way they put their work together, and they don't think like us, okay? We think in very linear terms. We want a beginning, middle, and end, all right? Not the ancients. They like to put the meat in the middle. We call this a chiasm, okay? And so sometimes a chiasm can be really short, like a couple of sentences. And it's both in the Old and New Testament. And it's the structure that I've illustrated here. You'll see how the beginning and the end kind of mirror each other. You come in, dialogues, discourses, and there are 3 of each. And we're moving towards this thing right here in the middle. Okay? The way a chiasm works is the thing in the middle is the message. It's the point. It's what it's all about. So if you want to know what the book of Job is all about, like at bottom, its main idea, the wisdom hymn of chapter 28 is where you need to go. That's really important because already this might be subverting your expectations about this book, right? This is about a righteous man who suffers. So we think it's going to be about justice. But actually, it's going to be about something else. It's going to be about wisdom. That's why I'm called wisdom literature. This wisdom hymn is the main indicator for us about what this thing is going to be about. Now, if you want to go ahead and read a good chunk of it. So the first 11 verses I won't read, but the writers, and also I should say this, we don't know who's writing chapter 28. It might be Job, and a lot of your Bibles will still have this as part of Job's previous speech, but that's contested. This very well may be the narrator, right? He writes the prologue, the epilogue, and then he inserts this hymn in chapter 28. So this might be the one other time in the book where we're hearing the voice of the author. There's nothing in the text that makes it obvious either way, but that may be the case. And the kinds of thing he's saying and the way it sounds a little bit different than Job. And it's funny, the first 11 verses, he's essentially marveling at man's genius, right? So he's marveling at the way man can dig into the ground and find, gold and silver and iron ore and make weapons and tools out of it. The way we can dam up water to get energy and agriculture and all this kind of thing. So if you can imagine, if this was written nowadays, it would be like, we can send a man to the moon, right? We can look inside your body. We can take robotic instruments in there that are microscopic and remove toxins and do these kinds of things, right? He's marveling at human wisdom for the first 11 verses. And this idea is that, man, we can only imagine just what wise man will be able to accomplish one day, right? And then, in verse 12, there's a transition. But where can wisdom be found? Like, do man know things? Yes. Right? Man is incredible. Right? We can affirm that. But here's the question that really matters. Where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? Man does not comprehend its worth. It cannot be found in the land of the living. The deep says, it's not in me. The deep is a place that presumably that mankind might want to explore one day. And so the idea is this innovative exploratory man might get there. Maybe we get to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, right? And the deep says, yeah, not here. The sea says, not here. It cannot be bought with the finest gold, nor can its price be weighed in silver. It cannot be bought with the gold of Ophir, with precious onyx or sapphires. Neither gold nor crystal can compare with it. None, nor can it be had for jewels of gold. Coral and jasper are not worthy of mention. The price of wisdom is beyond rubies. The topaz of Cush cannot compare with it. It cannot be bought with pure gold. In other words, it's the most valuable thing in the universe. You can get riches by digging into the ground, by doing all these things, but you can't find wisdom because wisdom is so much higher. But if you could, you would, wouldn't you? Because you dig into the ground and you break your back to get that gold. But if you could find this, now that would be something. So he repeats the question, where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds of the air. Destruction and death say, we heard a rumor, and it has reached our ears. Right? So death and destruction personified. Yeah, we heard a rumor about wisdom. God understands the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells. For he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm. Then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it, and he said to man, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. That's what the book of Job is all about. There is wisdom. It exists. And only God knows how to get to it. And when he gets to it, he declares to us what it is. The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to shun evil is understanding. We want justice. When we're suffering unjustly, we want justice. That's why we want answers, because the answer presumably would tell us why this is fair. But it turns out that that's not what we need. We want justice. We need wisdom. We want justice, but we need wisdom. This is a timeless truth of being human. We want justice, but we need wisdom. Many years later, Jesus would be walking into town in Jerusalem, and there was a man born blind. And he was asked, okay, Jesus, you tell us. Figure this one out for us. Why is this man blind? His sin or his parents' sin? What are they assuming? That it's a matter of justice. He's blind because they believe fundamentally that justice is the operating principle of the world. And so the only thing that would explain why an otherwise good person would be blind is it must be a retribution for his sin or his parents. They assume this has to be the case. So Jesus, you tell us, which is it? His or parents? Famously, he says, he does what he always does, right? Jesus gets questioned all the time, and he knows what people want to know. But more importantly, he knows what people need to know. And he doesn't tell them what they want to know. He tells them what they need to know. And he tells them that this man was born blind so that God would be glorified. But there's more to it than that. If you look at the passage in context, it's not, because that's comforting, but maybe up to a point. Like, really, I've got to go all through all of this just so you can get glory? Right? You can imagine a very embittered person saying something like that. But there's actually so much going on in this miracle. When he performs this miracle, it opens up this dialogue between him and the religious leaders where Jesus is able to expose their corruption. And this is what directly leads into his claim, I'm the good shepherd. On that day, the man born blind did not merely learn that his life, that he had to go through this so God could be glorified, but so that the good shepherd could be presented. And he himself would come under his care. Now, he got that answer. Job doesn't get that, though. But there is a principle at work. We want justice, but we need wisdom. Now, let me be clear. The very broad scope of the whole biblical counsel, what God has revealed to us, the narrative, the prophecy, law, the long arc of history and redemption and all that, it testifies to a very simple and important fact, that God is just, that he will see justice meted out, it will prevail in the end. Okay? This is a fact. The Bible is clear on this message. But justice, at least not as you think of it, is not the primary governing principle of the universe. We want it to be. But it turns out that justice is not the primary governance principle of the cosmos. Do you know what it is? Wisdom. What the book of Job teaches us is that here's what it takes. If you think of being the ruler of the cosmos as a job, and it lists the qualifications, all right? It does not say at the top, must be an expert on justice. What it would say on the top is you must have all the wisdom. That's the most important qualification for running the cosmos. And God alone has it. And this is one of the messages of, no, not one of, it's the primary message of the book of Job. Justice is not what it takes to run the world, it's wisdom. And you know what would happen if God did rule it by justice? We'd all be dead. You see? Think of it this way. Kids ask questions, right? Parents. Some of those questions are hard, aren't they? And sometimes those questions are not hard, but you know, okay, now how can I communicate this to my child at this age? Right? You go through this. And from the child's perspective, that question could be genuine curiosity, but depending on what it is, it also might be like a kind of frustration. There are words, for example, that I might not want my young children using, but I might use them. Okay? And I'm not talking about like cuss words. I mean just like, hate or stupid. Like I don't want my 2-year-old going around saying, I hate, right? And so I might tell them no. And they'll give, but you say it, right? And they might go, that's not fair. Because they want me, who's in charge, to operate the household on the principle of justice. But in fact, I'm operating the household primarily on the principle of wisdom. And wisdom dictates that I need to teach my child that hate is a powerful word. Be careful with it. And so for now, little one, until you can do the heavy lifting, no, that's a no-no word for you. Now, I get on my knees. I condescend. I get on their level. My son, my daughter, do you trust me? Will you trust me? There's something like that going on. And frankly, there's certain questions that kids, they shouldn't have to ask. There's a kind of heavy lifting, the existential questions of life. There's some wisdom in giving them some time to be kids. Right? Now, when we read there in Proverbs or Job 28, the very end, this is what, after he finds wisdom, he says to man, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. Have you heard that before? Does that ring a bell? Did that sound familiar to you when you read that? Or when I read it? Right? Proverbs 3, 5 through 8. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. And I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. That sounds to me like the Prosperity Gospel, 10th century BC edition. Seriously. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Right? Do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. We call this the retribution principle. And it was a foundational ethic, not just for the ancient Hebrews, but for most people in the world. If you were to ask an ancient person how does the world works, they would have described some version of the retribution principle. Do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. And Proverbs 3, 5 through 8 kind of says that. Job and his 4 friends believe the retribution principle, which is to say they believe Proverbs 3, 5 through 8. They can chapter and verse, right? They can proof text their worldview. So, think about it. You know Job's story. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Well, the Job story sort of busts that up entirely, doesn't it? Because he feared the Lord and he turned away from evil. He doesn't just assert this himself. God recognized this. And yet he has to go through all the suffering. In fact, let me show you this in the prologue. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright. That's the narrator. He's letting us know a little something important about his character. He's blameless and upright. In other words, he fears the Lord and he turns away from evil. So we would expect that this man is going to experience healing and refreshment. He deserves it. The retribution principle requires it. And he was one who feared God and turned away from evil. Literally quoting word for word 28:28. The key idea of this book. So the narrator lets us know that he buys into this. And so we read that more kind of his bio, right? There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many female servants. So in other words, the retribution principle is working perfectly. It's purring, right? He fears the Lord and turns away from evil. And so the life he's living is the life that we would expect. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one in his day, and they would send an invite to their 3 sisters and eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast were in their course, Job would send and consecrate them and would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. So the picture we get of Job is a pretty good one, but he's also so obsessed with righteousness that he's literally performing sacrifices on the behalf of his loved ones, just in case. So this should be a tiny or little glimpse into maybe something's not right in Job's worldview. Because it almost looks as though Job sees the retribution principle as a kind of prosperity gospel. Right? He believes in this so much, in fact, he's seen it work in his life. And so he's going to go to the nth degree to make sure that God continues to bless him. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Now, from this point forward, I'm going to do my best never to say Satan again tonight. Okay? This is a deep misfortune of our modern translations. Satan is not a name. It is a word. And in almost every case you see it in the Bible, it is Ha-Satan, the accuser. Okay? We have the systematic theology that's been drilled down into us that there's one cosmic enemy of God, and his name is Satan. He was there in Genesis 3, and he's always the guy leading the rebellion. It's not that simple. There are many creatures, seen and unseen, that are not in a right relationship with God. And the way the story unfolds, one sort of comes to the top, and eventually he becomes the Satan, and he sort of wears the title. He's the last one to take it, right? Satan is not his name. In fact, I think you can make a case, he's sort of like the one who shall not be named. Most of the titles, like devil, that's a word. Belial, Ha-Satan, dragon, right? These are descriptions, they're titles, they're not names. So it's possible that this being, this divine being who is in counsel with God is not the chief enemy of God, right? So that word Satan, it's put in there, it's capitalized. They drop the definite article the, and it makes for a confusing translation. It's the accuser. And so what's described here in chapter 1 and chapter 2 is something like a courtroom scene. And do you know what accusers do? They have a job, right? They're a part of a justice system, and their job is to present the interest of the prosecution. And that's what this person is doing. And he actually is doing what Yahweh commands him to do. He's on Yahweh's leash, right? He's doing his job. And because God, for no other reason than I can think of, than he simply chooses to do it this way, God governs this realm and the unseen realm with company. He just likes to do it that way. Does he have to? No. But God brings beings into his counsel, and he wants to govern the cosmos with them. And this person has a role in it. He has a job. Okay? So this being has a job. He's a member of the council, and he's about to say something to the leader of the council, who's Yahweh. Are you sure about that? That's what he's about to say. So it's along those lines. Hey, you know what? You should think about this. Okay? Now let me read on. The Lord said to the accuser, "From where have you come?" The accuser answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on earth and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to the accuser, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Right? The author has told us the character of this man, and now Yahweh himself, speaking to the accuser, says, "Have you seen my servant Job? He fears the Lord and turns away from evil." So that's God's appraisal of this man. He's impressed with Job. He's bragging about Job to the accuser. Then the accuser answered the Lord and said, "Yeah? Got a question for you. Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side?" In other words, well, of course he fears you. Because you give him everything he needs and wants. You reward him for every good work he does. How do you know that the only reason that he fears you and turns away from evil is so that he can get more blessing from you? And is that really fear? The accuser has got an excellent point, doesn't he? I think I told you this when I started, but whenever I read this book, I'm very convicted by it. And I find myself asking myself that question: do I fear the Lord for nothing? Like I should, actually. That's the idea. I should fear the Lord, love the Lord, serve the Lord, regardless of what it does for me. And the accuser is implying pretty heavily, yeah, you break that retribution principle, and then we'll see if he really loves you. And even when he says, look, you put a hedge around him. A hedge, you know what a hedge is, right? Like it defines the space. Right? If you go back to the creation account in Genesis 1, there's chaos in the world, right? Tohu and bohu. And how does God go about bringing order out of chaos? By dividing things, by putting hedges, we might say. Sky, land, water, land, right? Heavens, earth. That's what God is doing. So I think he's basically saying, yeah, you basically put him in Eden. Right? You made everything perfect for him. You gave him this nice little non-chaotic life. Of course he fears you. He's in a bubble. That's how I think we'd put it nowadays. Right? That Christian kid who's, Christian home, church, Christian school. No. Homeschooled, right? They're in a bubble, right? And you can imagine the accuser saying to this kid, well, yeah, you think you love the Lord. That's because you're in a bubble. What happens when the bubble bursts? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to the accuser, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So the accuser went out from the presence of the Lord. I got to be honest, I think the accuser is making a really good point. The retribution principle is a prosperity gospel. It is not right for the righteous to prosper, in other words. Why? Because if the righteous prosper, it undermines their motives for righteousness. And yet, it's not right for the righteous to suffer, because that would be unjust. Do you see the conundrum? Right? So if the retribution principle is true, then we've got a problem, because the righteous, if they prosper, their motives are undermined. But then if the retribution principle is not true, they'll suffer, and that's not fair. Right? You got a problem. And you know the story, he loses his possessions and his children, but then here's how he first responds. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. Wow. He just lost all of his possessions and his kids. He tears his clothes and he worships. Oh, he's a different kind of man. And he said, naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or change or charge God with wrong. This is quite an insight, isn't it? I mean, I think so far the evidence is there, right? The narrator, God himself, and now his response in this first round of torture. This is a man with few comparisons. He is righteous. He does fear the Lord and shun evil. But there's another round. And the Lord said to the accuser, have you considered my servant Job? Same thing. That there is none like him on the earth. Yeah, I see that now, right? A blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. And the accuser goes, oh yeah? Give me his body. And then he ravages his body. He's in pain. We read later in that chapter, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. I find this really fascinating, because when I think about the Adam and Eve story, remember that Eve was tempted and she sins and brings Adam the fruit, and he partakes. And I've always believed, and I think I still do, that one of the reasons that he sinned with her is because that's his woman. Right? Like the power of your helpmate is immense. But I've always thought it's, we have this idea that it's not fair that Adam had to represent all of us. Why should I get punished for his sin? And I've always thought, yeah, but we would have done the same thing. But Job went through that. And his wife says, curse God and die. And instead he says, you foolish woman. Right? Like Job's special, guys. He's special. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now, I do wonder if that's a clarification that maybe he hasn't sinned outwardly, but maybe something is changing on the inside. So his friends come, they visit with him, and they sit in silence with him for days. Until finally, Job breaks the silence. And he breaks out in chapter 3. He doesn't curse God, he curses his birth. Why'd you make me, God? Really? Curse the day of my birth. Why did you do this to me? So now we can see the darkness is creeping in to Job. And based on what he says in chapter 3, now his friends who at first were in silence go, okay, Job, we can't let that go. And so we get into the dialogue portion. He's got these 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And I think we can rightly assume that they basically represent the best the world has to offer in terms of wisdom. They represent the ancient Near East worldview, the retribution principle, all of that. They are the great philosophers of the day. We should see them that way in the way the story is being told. They give voice to that. And because they believe what Romans 3:5-8 says. They believe in the retribution principle. They believe that Job must be lying. Job continually asserts his innocence, and they say, Job, it doesn't work that way. And we know this to be true. So just admit what you did. Just whatever it is, get it out with it so that God will bless you and restore your good fortunes. In other words, they want Job to fear God for something, not nothing. Right? So if Job does it, if he follows their advice, cops up to some sin that he didn't do, in order to get God's blessing, the accuser will win. You see? It's God's policies that are on trial. Job stubbornly asserts, no, I know what you see. I see the same thing, but you're wrong. I'm innocent here. I've done nothing to deserve this. Along the way, we do get some hints that maybe one of the things that puts a little bit of wind in his sails is he has this kind of hope in an afterlife, which at this point in history is not clear. It's not laid out for us like us, but the hope of a resurrection and all that. It's not as clear to them as it was to us. So he seems to be clinging to this maybe as like a kind of faith, right? Like, well, this isn't right, but maybe God will make it right in the next life, kind of a thing. And so you see hints of this worldview that maybe life isn't fair, but it will be later. In chapter 19, he says, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth, right? You just see him in his power, right? And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold and not another. Seemingly some kind of hope that even if he doesn't get justice now, he'll get it later in a new body. Chapter 14, but a man dies and is laid low, man breathes his last, and where is he? Now, you've probably all at some point been around a dead body, right? There's an eeriness to it, isn't it? And if you've ever been in the presence of someone who had just very recently died, minutes or hours ago, it's hard not to kind of have that moment of, they were here 10 minutes ago. Where is he or she now? Right? So that's what Job is observing, right? He's been laid in the ground. Where is he? Right? There's the sense there's something else. He's more than a body. Where is he? As waters fall from the lake and a river wastes away and dries up, so a man lies down and rises not again. Until the heavens are no more, he will not awake or be roused out of his sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that's the underworld, that you would conceal me until your wrath be past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service, I would wait till my renewal should come. Right? So we've got a couple of hints that maybe that's what is getting Job through this. He believes that it's not fair, but maybe God will make it right in the afterlife. But there's also evidence that Job may be waiting on the retribution principle. Chapter 9, 22, it is all one, therefore I say, he's speaking of God, he destroys both the blameless and the wicked. That's a clear violation of the retribution principle. When disaster brings sudden death, he mocks at the calamity of the innocent. Or in chapter 27, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, so he blames God for his bitterness. As long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood and my tongue will not utter deceit. So he's clinging to his good works still, even though he's angry and bitter. Far be it for me to say that you are right. So even though he won't lie, even though he won't commit falsehood or do these kinds of things, he also won't say you're right. Right? Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast to my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. You can see his insistence of his innocence. Now, these three voices, they stand behind the retribution principle. And so basically their advice is, Job, admit it, so that God can give you your blessings back. And like I said, if he does this, it means the accuser wins. Because all this time he has been fearing God in order to get blessing. And this is where we get to the wisdom hymn. It's when I think the narrator, the writer of this book, wants to make the reader, let's pause for a second. Did you like the answers his friends gave him? Maybe, maybe not. Probably mixed, right? You can probably resonate with a lot of it. But if you're reading the same book I am, you're going, but Job's a good guy. And the answer is, you want justice, but what you need is wisdom. And so now we have these long discourses. It's not so much a back and forth, they're long speeches. Job goes first, and he gives his closing argument. And I just say it's 3 chapters long, and he makes a really good closing argument. He makes a good case for why God has not been fair to him. Right? If anyone is righteous, look, this man is. In fact, the prophet Ezekiel, there's 3 men that he identifies as being like the greatest moral heroes like ever in the world. Noah, who was righteous in his day, as we read in Genesis. Daniel, and it's like, what did he ever do wrong? Like, he's one of those few people that comes unscathed in the narrative. And Job. Right? So he's like at a real upper echelon of personal righteousness, according to the prophet. God himself recognizes this, and so he just summarizes his arguments, and they're compelling, to be honest with you. He makes a really good case that this is not fair, and so he demands an audience with God. God, I want answers. And then Elihu, we learn that there's this 4th kid, right? He's been here the whole time, and he decides it's his turn to speak, right? He's deferential, right? He let all the old has-beens say their piece first. But the young buck is going to come in and go, oh, guys, I just got my degree. Good try. Let me take a stab at it. He's young, he's clever, and he says, Job, I believe you. You are a good man, righteous. So God, therefore, must be bringing this on you because of what's going on the inside. Maybe you haven't committed a sin yet, but you will sin. And God is punishing you or preparing you, trying to purify, to get you to get right with him so that you don't commit future sins. All right? So this is a much more sophisticated argument. And we repeat this argument all the time. Right? When we're going through a hard time, right? I don't know why. But maybe God wants to change me through it, right? Like there's a version of this argument that's wise. And I think that most commentators will say, yeah, Elihu is not as wrong, right? He's almost right, even. Because he wants to say, you're not just the deeds that you do, right? What's going on in here, right? He's honing in on something. The problem is that even there, Job doesn't really have an equal. And so this too, Job rejects. Now, we're 30-some chapters in now. Job has said some wonderful things. He's also said some very harsh things, right? He said some wrong things. He's done some wrong things. He's not unblemished at this point. However, he has maintained his integrity, his believing loyalty to Yahweh. He has not cursed God. And he did not, and this is the most important thing we need to understand, after all this, he did not try to appease God by buying his favor back. In other words, God's governing policies are on trial, and God wins because Job turns out that he's been fearing God for nothing. Is he hurt? Yes. Is he confused? Yes. Does he say and do some of the wrong things? Yes. But he does not curse God. He does not try to buy back God's favor. He does indeed serve God for nothing. And then Yahweh shows up out of the whirlwind. And he gives him this incredible 2-chapter-long virtual tour of the cosmos. For funsies, I'd love for someone to update this as though this happened in the 21st century. So it could be described in kind of a modern, not scripture, but it would be different. It would be updated, right? Because an ancient person's understanding the cosmos was kind of small compared to what it is now, right? Like take him to the planetarium, right? And just blow his mind with how vast the universe is and all those things. So Job passes the most important part. He doesn't curse God, but he does have this false assumption about God, how God is operating the universe, and namely that justice is the founding principle. But it turns out he just does not have sufficient perspective to make these kinds of claims because he lacks wisdom. He gets in God's face because there's things he doesn't know and can't know. And so he's just not even qualified to make these accusations. And part of what God is doing here with these questions and this cosmic tour is, would you like to try for a day? Can you do what I do? Do you know what I know? Do you see what I see? Do you have the power that I have? How well do you think you would really do, Job? If you were in charge for the day, I know what you would do, right? You would enforce the retribution principle. Do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. And then guess what? There'd be no one left. It's like, what's your wish, right? The genie comes, I grant you one wish in the world. Peace on earth, right? You know how that can happen? There's an episode of the X-Files where this happens, right? Right? They wish for peace on earth, and they got it, right? They woke up the next day and there was no one left but them, right? It didn't have the wisdom. Thought, knew what he needed, but he didn't. Only God did. And then Job, after all these questions, he replies, okay, I lay my hand on my mouth, I shut up, I spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further. Right? So he relents, like he said, okay, I got it, I hear you, your point's been made, I'll shut up. And then God says, I'm not done. Brace yourself, buddy. I got more questions for you. Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. Have you heard of the behemoth? Have you heard of the Leviathan? Right? He points him in this final section of the speech to these two incredible creatures. And there's a lot of theories as to what these creatures are, and I think most of them are kind of unhelpful, but maybe fun. So the idea that behemoth is a hippo and the Leviathan is a crocodile began in the 1600s when some very well-meaning scholar made it his mission to go through the Bible and find every animal and write it like a catalog of biblical taxonomy, so to speak. And he's the one that reached the conclusion, and then it just took off from there. And there's a couple of obvious problems. You're reading along the behemoth and go like, yeah, that could be a hippo. And then his tail is described as like cedar. And you go, have you seen a hippo? That tail is wimpy, right? Right? The crocodile, you're reading along the Leviathan. Oh, I can see how that could be a crocodile. But he breathes fire? Yeah, I've seen a crocodile. They don't breathe fire. Problem there, right? And then in the last 50, 60 years, there's been this idea that maybe these are kinds of dinosaurs, which I just think is unhelpful at all. I don't think that's at all what's going on here. And then maybe they're mythological characters. And by the way, especially Leviathan, you can read about them. Isaiah 27, Psalm 74. They show up elsewhere in the Bible, and they show up outside of the Bible. These are mythological creatures, like in the literature in the ancient Near East. So when he says, have you seen behemoth? You go, oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. Oh yeah, Leviathan, I know who you're talking about. There are these incredible archetypical beasts, and what they represent in the Bible and out of the Bible is something like chaos. Okay? So whatever behemoth and Leviathan are, just get the point that God is making. That's what I'm trying to say. The point is, these mighty, powerful beasts, they're my pets. And they're part of my good world. My world is good and ordered and beautiful, but it's also imperfect and wild and untamable. Now, fortunately, we have more books than just Job, and we can fill in some of the gaps. There's sin in the world, right? So, in other words, because we live in a broken world and in a sinful world, if God's world were just good, ordered, and beautiful, and perfectly just, well, that means we'd be gone. So we live in this point of tension where in his mercy, he allows life to go on, beauty to continue to exist. But until sin and death are finally defeated once for all, this is our world. It's good, ordered, and beautiful, but it's still yet imperfect, wild, and dangerous. But nothing they do, as powerful as they might be, is outside of my control. And I think, actually, it's in these two creatures that God comes the closest he gets to giving Job an answer. The behemoth, I think one of his answers is basically like, yeah, look at the behemoth, okay? You know, Job, you and the behemoth have a lot in common, actually. The behemoth is of great prestige and position. He's an apex, right? No, nobody can undermine. You know, he asserts his will. He's got power and dominion. So does Job, right? He's well regarded. He's wealthy and well off. He's in this position of prestige and influence. But notice something, Job. Look at the behemoth again. When the waters come raging down, what does the behemoth do? He just stands there. He's not afraid of the raging waters. So look to the behemoth, Job. Oh, and look at the Leviathan. It's wild, isn't it? Have you ever seen anyone tame that creature? I can. Job, you need to understand something. I will not be tamed. Don't think that you can put me in your box. I will not be domesticated. So Job, here we are, we're at the end of the book. He's got no answers. You know that? He got no answers. He went through hell. Got in God's face. God showed up and didn't answer him. But Job answers the Lord. In chapter 42, that Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. What has he just realized? I wanted justice. I needed wisdom. You had it. Thanks for showing up and giving me a little bit of it. Hear, and I will speak. I will question, and you will make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you, and therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. It's a hard thing to repent before the answers come, isn't it? Job does. Job is exposed. He thought he wanted justice, but he really needed wisdom. And when he realizes that God is God and he is not, and that he should not try to tame him, he sees that he's the problem, and so he repents. Here he is, basically the most righteous man on the earth, repenting. What does it say about the rest of us? Right? This is just one of the reasons that when I read this book, I'm convicted by it. Right? If Job, who literally has the testimony of Yahweh himself, that he fears the Lord and shuns evil, and there's no one like him all over the earth, is repenting in dust and ashes, where ought I be? He hasn't found what he was looking for, the answers, but he found what he needed. He found wisdom. True wisdom is knowing that God is enough. Right? It's when there's this gap of knowledge, this gap of understanding, wisdom is knowing, oh, I don't know, but God does. And that actually turns out to be wisdom. You see, to go through life and not know the why of suffering is just to be human. This is a timeless reality of being a human. Bad things happen. And we don't know why. And so in some sense, this is one of the most human stories you can imagine. A good person going through suffering. Welcome to reality. But be careful when that happens. You see this restless search of answers. You're going to make some mistakes. And it ends up being one of two things, right? One is you take the route of the three friends and you oversimplify it, right? Why did their answers fall short? Because they thought God was simple, right? They had a simple principle. Look, this is it. This is the governing principle of the universe. It's true. Therefore, it's all your fault, Job. Right? And so they have this unsophisticated, cliche answer that ends up being unhelpful and just straight up wrong. Right? And we do this. Sometimes when we're looking for answers, we're so desperate for an answer that we'll cling to a bad one. Right? Well, don't cling to bad answers. Don't want to commit that mistake. But the other mistake is, and it's Job's mistake, is we end up impugning the character of God. So when it comes to unjust suffering, there's two basic lessons. I kind of put them on here, keys. Understand that the purpose is more important than explanation. Right? Knowing that God has a purpose, even if you don't know the purpose, is more important than having the explanation for why you're going through what you're going. Right? And this is how we love the Lord. This is how we fear the Lord and turn from evil. By saying something like, though you slay me, yet I will trust him. Right? That's saying, God, I don't know why, but I do believe that this isn't random and that you have a purpose for it. It's like the blind man in John 9. I don't know why. My sin, my parents' sin? No, it turns out that God was going to glorify himself in that instance. And wisdom is actually superior to justice. This is hard for us, I think, because justice is such a powerful instinct. It is, isn't it? Right? It's something we want. I think love and justice, like those are the things we crave more than anything. But the lesson of this book is that actually when it comes to the way God is governing a broken world, it doesn't take justice, it takes wisdom. That's what it takes. And only God has what it takes. So, purpose is more important than explanation, and wisdom is more important than justice. Now here we are with the end of the book. Job does not understand his suffering. Okay? He does not have the explanation. But he trusts the one who does. John Walton put it well. He says, trust steps in where knowledge fails. But then he adds, but trust fails where love fails. So part of what it takes for Job to say, though he slay me, yet will I trust him, even though he doesn't have an explanation, even though what he sees is unjust, one of the reasons he's able to operate in trust is because he believes that fundamentally God loves him. Right? To believe in God's love is to say, yeah, Lord, I trust you. I can trust you because, I go back to the thing where I said earlier with the kids, right? When my 2 or 3-year-old child, I'm saying, it's not yet, not ready. I don't want you using those words yet. And they can't understand why, and it seems unfair. And then I say, do you trust me? And implied to that is, don't you know that I love you? And that I want what's best for you? Now, my 3-year-old might not know this, but if they go around telling everyone that they hate them, you know what's going to happen when they're 10? They won't have any friends. And then what will the world be to them? A very harsh place where everybody is evil and wicked and hates them. Right? Well, I can actually stop that cycle now, right? Or at least slow it down by saying, no, that's not for you. You don't need to be talking like that, thinking like that. Trust me, I love you, and I know better. This final few verses, the epilogue in chapter 42, Job's friend, God speaks, and he says, Job, your friends, they were wrong. Right? He says that. He says, you have not spoken what is right. He's saying this to the friends, but Job has. Right? So again, on the micro level, Job missteps along the way. But on the macro level, no, like he prevails, right? So God is saying, yep, your friends said wrong, but Job has not. He has spoken what is right. And then there's this really cool, again, evidence of the chiasm. In the prologue, Job is doing these sacrifices, right? Almost as a just in case. But in the epilogue, he's operating as a kind of mediator at God's instruction. He's instructed to perform these sacrifices on the behalf of his friends. Right? So now he's actually offering a priestly service at the end of the book. Instead of it being possibly a way to get God's favor, he's doing it as an act of obedience for the interest of others, not for himself. And then his fortunes are restored. They're doubled. And the moral of the story is something like, if you get through the test, your fortunes will double, right? This is not a reward. This is God saying to the accuser, you lost. My policy stands. And because I want to, I'm going to see to it that he gets double of everything that he lost. And there's one little cool thing in there. You know, his fortunes are double, right? He goes from 3,000 to 6,000, 7,000 to 14,000, 500 to 1,000. Like everything doubles except for his kids. It was 7 and 3, and now it's still 7 and 3. But an argument can be made that his fortunes did double. Because he still has those 7 and those 3. He has now 14 and 6, right? His children. I just say that because it's interesting. I mean, I'm speculating, but it's kind of cool to think about. And then it ends that he died an old man full of his days. And then, one final note, just because it's interesting. You know what the Septuagint is, right? It's the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and it adds a verse. And it basically says that Job will be raised in the end, the final appearing, you know, he'll be vindicated and all this stuff. It adds this. It's not in the Hebrew text. And there's a lot of speculation as to what happened, and it very well may be that some redactor says, I just can't accept that this is how the book ends. And I need to know that it's all going to be made right in the end. Again, we're speculating, we don't know. But even someone that was trying to translate God's word, got through the whole thing, right, and goes, and then when he'll be raised on the last day, right? We want the cherry on the top so bad that even the 70 scholars involved with that seem to put that in there. Of course, it's possible that they might have had some other source and it belonged in there. Either way, I'm fine with just leaving it in tension. It's sort of like the timelessness of this story, right? Are you satisfied with this? I mean, no, not really. Like, we get to the end of it. There's some lessons, purpose over explanation. Wisdom is the true governing principle of the cosmos in a fallen world, and it's even more important than justice. Like, okay, that's good. I'm on my way, but that's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted more. I wanted to know why. I didn't get it. So I tell you what, I want to provide for you what God, that's way too high of a standard. I want to remind you of God's words to Job when he shows up. And if you would, I'm going to read a fairly lengthy portion here and end with this. I better get a drink. I'd encourage you to listen. This is poetry after all. Think deeply about these questions. If you want to go back and read these on your own time, these are from chapters 38 and 39. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set doors and bars in place. When I said, this far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges?
and shake the wicked out of it. The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their unpraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. What is the way to the abode of light? Where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. Have you entered the storehouses of snow or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts channel from the torrents of rain and a path for the thunderstorm? To water a land where no man lives, a desert with no one in it, to satisfy a desolate wasteland and make it sprout with grass. I got to pause here. He's saying there's a place out there that you might not ever see, and I love it so much that I water and tend even to that. Can you do that? Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of a dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens when the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen? I haven't even read half of it. I hope that to tease, please, go home tonight, wake up tomorrow morning, read Job 38, 39. Just read to the end of the book. Read chapter 28, the hymn to wisdom. If you really want to understand what this book is about, it's tempting to get in God's face and say, Lord, here are my questions. Give me an answer. What turns out what we need is for God to show up and ask us some really penetrating questions. Try to answer these questions. Let's pray. Father, I want it to be true that I fear you, love you, serve you for nothing. That if there was no reward, if there was no promise of prosperity, if there was no cosmic math that could say, if I do this, then I'll be blessed. If all of that was taken away, that I'd still love you, that I'd still serve you. I'd like to believe that I would serve and love those that you've put in my care in such a way. My family and the church and my neighbors. Do I love, serve, to get something? Or just because? What I'm realizing, Lord, what yet again is when I read this book, there's a lot I don't understand about you and your world, but I realize that that's not what's wrong with the world. I am. So, Father, I pray that you would do a work in my mind and heart and in the minds and hearts of those in here, that you would teach us to trust you, to lean into your wisdom, and that when we don't have answers, we'd be able to look up to you and say, I don't know what you're doing, Lord, but I trust you. Amen.